Well, welcome back. In this video, we will create tactical or plinking rifle reloads, and we will do that by building upon the knowledge and experience we have gotten from the prior videos. You will find three major differences compared to the problems we solved and the techniques we used to create tactical pistol bullets. The first of these is the method of lubrication. Second, the lack of needing to flare the neck of the cartridge case. And the third, whether we create a cannel or crimp or not. Remember, we are making tactical rifle reloads. The primary mission is the safety of the round. I know I keep saying that, but I cannot stress it enough. Our secondary mission is to create rounds that are really reliable. Tactical rifle rounds, especially in a match, must feed and fire flawlessly every single time. The third mission is to make rounds that are at least as precise as commercial ammo. In my experience, though, your hand loads will probably be better than 90% of commercial ammo, by the way. If you want to learn about creating highly precise and accurate rifle rounds, those techniques are covered in the 301 series of the videos. Even though I had recommended that you begin with a progressive or semi-automatic press, I will say that the principles and operations I'll show you now will work just as well on a single station press as they will on the progressive machine. At this point, I'm going to assume that you have good quality brass, each cartridge case carefully inspected and cleaned, and that if you have once fired military brass, that the primer pocket crimp has been removed. Now on to lubrication. Lubrication is a most important step because a rifle sizing die, much more than a pistol cartridge sizing die, is a high friction device. The die really works and squeezes the cases, which your right arm will soon make clear to you. It is essential to lubricate your cases, but just enough, not enough lubrication, and you'll get a case stuck in your sizing die, a most difficult problem to solve. Or at the very least, the force required to resize a poorly lubricated case will be excessive. So the reloading will no longer be fun, but rather work. Too much lubricant, on the other hand, will build up on the inside of the die, deform the cases, especially at the shoulder like you see here. A major difference from straight-sided bullets is that the rifle sizing die not only squeezes down the outside of the case, it squeezes the neck of the cartridge more than is needed. And then this ball on the end of the decapping pin expands the neck back to the correct internal diameter as you pull the case back out of the die. That's why you need just a little lubricant on the inside of the cartridge case neck, but I stress a little, and only within the neck. And that brings up a point of contention. To allow a smooth passage of the neck expanding ball back up through the neck requires some lubricant. But if you get too much lubricant inside the cartridge case, the oil may change the burning characteristic of your powder. Some reloaders state that you must complete the sizing decapping process as a completely separate step. Then re-clean the cases to remove any residual bits of lubricant within the case. And this is exactly what I describe in the next video when we learn to create reloads for accurate and precise shooting. But I have found that if I lube carefully and correctly, my M4 rounds are reliable and accurate enough for my tactical and plinking missions. To lubricate the cases using this minimal technique, only a small number of the cases can be upright. Then when you spray, the majority of the lubricant falls on the outside of the case. Additionally, to help make this process more efficient and require less lubricant, especially if you're going to reload large numbers of cases, I recommend you find a carbide ball for your decapping pin. Carbide requires less lubricant and will not be deformed or change size significantly during many years of service. Now, lubricated, at this point we can dump the clean, lightly lubed cases into our case feeder. Oh, by the way, To save time in handling, almost everybody using a progressive reloader also buys this case feeder. The feeder will automatically keep your plastic feed tube filled, saving you from performing any additional handling. Now, given the background knowledge you have from all of the other videos, reloading for rifle cartridges is going to seem pretty straightforward, almost anticlimactic. When the handle pull brings the cartridge case into position 1, another pull at the station 1 pushes the cartridge case up into the die, performing the resizing decapping operation. But remember, squeezing the neck a little too much. As you pull the cartridge back out of the die, the ball on the end of the decapping pin re-expands the neck. For the first few cases, even though you've set up your reloader, it's worthwhile measuring, say, 3 of them, just to be certain. If the cartridge goes too deeply into this tool, you're squeezing the case too much. After a few reloadings, those cartridges ultimately will come apart during firing, a condition known as a case head separation. You can feel as easily as see whether the cartridge fits between these two allowable limits. Then check the other end. If your cartridge protrudes from the tip, from the end of this tool, you will have to perform an additional operation, case trimming. Fortunately for us, there are any number of good, easy-to-use tools for this operation. But, you know, now we come to the dangerous part. We're using primers and powder. So here I must insert my hold harmless agreement, as I do in every one of my videos. Continuing to watch this video using these techniques is your contract with me that you assume full and absolute responsibility for anything bad that happens, including death, serious injury. Now, if that's not an acceptable contract, please stop watching the video. For those of you still with me after that, let's continue. Put the cartridge case back into station 2. Push the handle all the way up to seat the primer, again ever so carefully. A downward pull raises the ram and charges the case with powder. Bringing the cartridge back down allows you to remove it and confirm the correct quantity of powder has been dropped. And it's only needing to do this the first 2 or 3. Notice, this die, unlike the pistol die, does not flare the case mouth as it drops the powder. Oh, check also that the primer is seated correctly, just the slightest bit below the cartridge head base. Once you have finished with these checks, you can put the case locator button back in and proceed more rapidly. In the next station, the powder check will tell us we have the correct amount of powder in the case. Bullet seating will be our next step. Pick up a bullet as you cycle the handle. That cycle will move the cartridge case to the seating die, so you can now simply drop the bullet onto the case neck. Another handle cycle will seat your bullet. Remove the first few rounds again, so you can check overall dimensions. Replace the rounds on the plate, complete the cycle. Notice my last station is empty. Some reloaders like to crimp a bullet in place for their M4s, and this is where you would put that crimp die. If you are using lead bullets, crimp is certainly a good idea. But if you're going to crimp jacketed bullets, you have to make sure the bullet has a cannelure, that groove that you see here, and that you seat the bullet just deep enough so that the crimp of the cartridge case neck pushes just the tiniest bit of brass and only into the cannelure. I should tell you that most reloaders recommend a light crimp if you're going to fire rounds in an auto-loading rifle. But here a caution. Over-crimp the bullet, and you will almost certainly deform the case shoulder. Then almost certainly cause yourself a live case stuck in your rifle chamber when you're next at the range. Now, let's put all of these moves together and see what the whole process looks like. Notice, you pick up a bullet in your left hand before pulling the charging handle down when you get to this point. Yes, you can go faster, but I'm being careful, ever so careful about that primer seating. At this point, if you've carefully done your adjustments, your reloading is smooth, easy. And at this point, your learning curve, the process is almost anticlimactic, isn't it? But in the real world, nothing is perfect. What about the inevitable interruptions? You can almost guarantee that your reloading session will get interrupted. The phone may ring. We may need to refill powder, primers, or add more cartridge cases. Here's the critical habit to develop. Always stop the process with the operating handle down and the RAM all the way up. And do that whether you're using this progressive or a single station press. Then you'll know exactly what you need to do when you return to your reloading bench. Second, if you interrupt a pull for any reason, if you do not carry a cycle to completion, for example, because you suspect that, say, the primer is not seating correctly, it's best to stop, to take every one of those cartridges out of all the shell holders, dump the powder from each case, and start the process all over again. An interrupted cycle is a prescription for disaster because it is ever so easy to fail to fill a cartridge case with powder. If you fire an empty cartridge case, the primer often has enough energy, enough power to push the bullet well into the chamber. Now, you might not hear the pop of the primer, given that you're using hearing protection. The next round may chamber fire, and since the barrel is occluded by that first bullet, you'll blow up your gun, possibly yourself. Which brings me back to safety. Please allow me to re-emphasize the need for safety. I know, I keep harping on the safety thing to the point of being tedious. First, you're dealing with gunpowder and explosive primers. You'll hear that the smokeless powders don't really explode, they just burn really, really fast. That's true if you're a physicist. But I guarantee your hands and face won't tell the difference if you negligently handle powder or primers. You know, if you're uncomfortable with handling these things, these devices, if you can't store them safely, if you can't do your reloading well away from open flames, away from the kids, I recommend you simply buy loaded rounds. Life is too short to hurt yourself and the others who live with you. Speaking of safety, you should know that there is a difference between the .223 Remington civilian cartridge and the .556 45 military cartridge. Let me take a moment to talk about these two rounds. They look the same, and on the outside, they measure the same. But they are not the same round. The military case, the .556, generally has thicker walls and usually develops higher pressures when fired. Probably more important to us reloaders, the .223 and the .556 rifles chambers and throats are cut to different dimensions. So another caution, you may not be able to safely fire .556 military rounds in your civilian rifle. In fact, the organization that standardizes these things, SAMI, simply states .556 is incompatible with a .223 chambered rifle. I recommend you do a little research on the internet to clarify the problem, and here's a good article that will help you. You'll certainly notice I'm wearing gloves. Handling lead and most of the solvents we use today is quite simply unsafe. Not only do I wear gloves, I wash my hands carefully after the reloading session ends, and I bring nothing to eat or drink into the reloading area. You'll hear that you should use cold water for the wash to avoid, quotes, opening pores. That's non-scientific nonsense. Finally, you haven't seen my use of the safety glasses, but each of these procedures is capable of putting shards of metal and hot gas into your eyes and face. Your face may heal, but eyes are simply not replaceable. Let me make another point about safety. Most people who reload sooner or later start experimenting with different bullets, different powder charges. Possibly the most important safety point I can make is to avoid developing too much pressure in your cartridges. All guns are different. If you decide to experiment, increase the quantity of your powder toward that maximum published load very slowly, very carefully, looking for signs of excessive pressure. If your rifle is cycling poorly, if your bolt is difficult to open after firing a round, your load is already too hot. You are developing too much pressure in the rifle chamber. If your autoloader extractor bends the rim back a bit, the load is developing too much pressure. Examining the fired primer turns out to be a helpful indicator of too much pressure. To begin with, you need a good baseline, a reference. You might save a commercial round fired from your rifle, then look at and keep that fired primer as what the primer should look like. Here, notice, the edges are still round, aren't they? They're not flattened. If the primers begin to be flattened, you have exceeded normal pressures. In this round, the hot gases escaped around the edges of the primer. Notice the sooty marks. Here the overpressure has actually burned a hole in the base of the cartridge. There are other signs of dangerously increased chamber pressures, and I can recommend these two websites to give you a better understanding of, and I hope help you avoid the problem. Another non-intuitive danger is cutting way back on the quantity of the powder. You would think that the pressure would be lower, but especially rapidly burning powders, to go lower than the lowest recommended dose is asking for an explosion. Too little powder can lead to abnormally high pressures. And yes, it's counterintuitive, but once you get below a certain level of powder, the powder is said to explode rather than burn quickly. Trust your reloading manuals and the Hodgdon website. They do their pressure experiments under carefully controlled and safe conditions. By the way, remember the effect of temperature. A load that shows no sign of increased pressure on a winter morning may in fact be way overloaded when you fire it at the range on a hot summer afternoon. Now, let's talk about important error possibilities. No mechanical device is perfect. It and you will make mistakes, and you need to know how to handle mistakes, or at least most of them. First, you simply cannot load bad brass, and if you pick up random brass from the range, you have no idea how many times it has been reloaded or overloaded. By the way, to save the makers some trivial amount of money, some cartridges are made with Berdan rather than Boxer primers. Here's what a Berdan primed case looks like. Notice two flash holes off the center, but no central flash hole. Accidentally get one of these into your batch of cases and you will destroy your decapping pin. This is a good point to talk about reusing military brass. Most military brass primers are crimped into place. Crimped primers take a bit more energy to remove, but that's not the key problem. Once the punched out primer is gone, you still have a problem in removing that excess brass that remains around the primer pockets. Trying to insert another primer in that pocket simply doesn't work. There are tools to remove this crimped brass around the edge, but the process is tedious, and I recommend you save the time and get either match military brass, which has no crimped primers, or commercial brass. Still, if you have the time, buy a primer pocket reamer. About every 50 rounds, I check the cartridges, box them, label them, wipe the excess lubricant off the cases with a naphtha-dampened towel. Naphtha-dampened towel, but be careful. You do not get any solvent on the primer. You will likely deactivate that primer. I know it's tedious. I know I harp on this, but no job is finished until the paperwork is done. And did you notice that I have labeled everything, all the parts of my reloading equipment, especially the critical components that can lead to error? And when I'm finished, I write down in my bound notebook what I've done. I make a label for each box of cartridges. Problems will occur, and we need to go back to our records to find out why. Just as importantly, really special loads will sometimes accidentally happen. Generally a pleasant surprise, and you'll want to go back to reproduce them. Now let me make an important point. I have no conflict of interest in recommending any of these tools, devices, primers, powders, anything like that to you. I have no financial or any other relationship to any of the American manufacturers. The fact that I'm using a Dillon press in this video is simply that it was the first progressive press available when I bought it some 25 years ago. No manufacturer gives me money or any other compensation to say good things about them. Finally, when you finish for the day, empty your powder back into its original plastic container. Unless you're going to reload the next day, leaving the powder in the reloader's hopper will expose it to light, which causes it to deteriorate. And if you live in a human environment, human area, possibly even to cake together. Caked powder will give you erratic powder charges. One of my underlying themes in these videos is my hope, my wish to bring scientific method rather than expert opinion, especially mine, to the shooting sports. Each statement I have made, each procedure I have described and shown you can be tested if you trust your own powers of observation at the range. You know, you should test each and every one, because the first rule of scientific method is to be skeptical, to question all authority. Again, let me emphasize, especially mine. When something you have observed or been told by some expert doesn't make sense, when something an expert has told you doesn't pass your sniff test, perform your own experiments, believe your own findings, your own eyes, your own conclusions. I'll speak more about this experimental thing and science thing in the 4th video series, Bringing Scientific Method to the Shooting Sports. Friends, reloading for tactical needs and for plinking really is just as straightforward as I have shown you. All you need is the correct attitude, a certain carefulness, attention to detail, and a small amount of technical knowledge. You'll soon develop the appropriate feel for each step of the operation. But let me caution you, if you run into excessive resistance, don't keep pushing. That operating arm gives you tremendous mechanical advantage, and you will do serious damage if you don't first figure out the cause of your trouble. With your new technical knowledge, some basic equipment, meticulous attention to detail, lack of distraction, safe space, you'll make rounds you can be proud of. Reloading can bring you real enjoyment, but my critical observation, one thing you cannot put a value on is the independence from outside interference that reloading your own ammunition will give you. In today's uncertain Second Amendment environment, you will value that independence highly, and I am fairly certain we will all value that independence even more highly in the future we are likely to live in. Now at the end, if you make comments or ask questions below and sign your real name, I'll do my best to answer those questions. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If not, tell me how I can improve it, and I'll do my best to do so. In the next video series, 301 Reloading, I'll show you how to make accurate and precise rounds for long range, aka sniper rifle shooting, and for bullseye pistol competition.